So I'm going to talk about vitamins and minerals, and I'm going to be somewhat provocative here. Not all of you out there will agree with what I have to say. The title of this talk is The Myth of the Good Diet. And the myth is that people think you can get all the nutrition you need from a healthy diet, and I'm just going to question that. A lot of people think vitamins and minerals are a waste of time, and often if you talk about taking vitamins and minerals, people will say it just gives you expensive pee. So you've probably all heard that. Oh, thanks. So I've got some questions which I'm going to try and answer in this. Why take nutritional supplements at all? Why might anyone be nutrient deficient? Who might be nutrient deficient? And is there evidence for supplements? So here's an example of the sort of article that generates popular headlines. And this is from the BMJ, the Food for Thought series 2020. So it came out in June this year. And the byline here is growing numbers of healthy people are taking dietary supplements, but there is little evidence that they protect against non-communicable diseases. And you might think with a headline like that, game over, like why bother? What is there even to talk about? But I guess if you read more carefully, they're talking about healthy people taking supplements. Who the hell is healthy? They do say that inadequate intake of micronutrients is still common in high-income countries where dietary patterns are typically energy-rich but nutrient-poor, which is actually a polite way of saying most of us eat crap. Like I said, I wonder where all these healthy people are. Somewhere in that paper it says supplements may have benefits for population subgroups, people with inadequate nutrient intake. So supplements might be useful for people with inadequate nutrient intakes. So that begs the question, who are the people who are nutrient deficient and why might they be nutrient deficient? And I'm going to give you some examples. They might be dieting. So there's lots of dieters out there and they're often not eating enough. As we've heard earlier this morning, industrial agriculture, food that's grown in nutrient depleted soils. Sheer geography, there are some soils that are naturally nutrient depleted, and Australia is one of those places that has, parts of Australia have significant nutrient depletion in soils. It's just part of Australian geography. A Western diet, you might be one of these people with poor digestion. There's a saying, not so much you are what you eat, but you are what you absorb. There may be increased physiological needs, and examples are pregnancy and breastfeeding, but also growth, so children. Healing, for example, post-surgery, or you've got a chronic illness and you need extra nutrients to get the healing happening. There are medications that deplete people of nutrients, and some good examples are proton pump inhibitors and antihypertensives. And let me tell you, there are an awful lot of people out there on those medications. Excess alcohol and recreational drugs. There may also be increased demands, people who are physically active and athletes, the increased demands of pregnancy, chemical and toxic exposures. Genetics, single nucleotide polymorphisms, the acronym is SNPs, and guess what? All of us have got SNPs somewhere along the line. There are lots of anti-nutrients in some foods, and lectins, phytates, non-protein amino acids, there's a whole story out there about them. So people who may well be nutrient deficient are the young, the very old, teenagers for obvious reasons, women, sick people, people with chronic diseases, people on medications, impoverished people. So who isn't nutrient deficient? That particular article, the BMJ article, went on to say that supplementation through food fortification is needed to prevent poor health outcomes from nutrient deficiencies in such countries. And we'll get on to a couple of examples of food fortification in a moment. So supplements are needed for people who are nutrient deficient, but there is scant acknowledgement that wealthy countries such as Australia, which has a huge problem with metabolic disease, might also have a problem with nutrient deficiency. So moving on. That wouldn't be Australia, would it? Well, actually, this is the next couple of slides are data from the ABS, and the ABS is a well-known hotbed of nutritional radicalism, not. The data is a bit old, 2011, 2012, published in 2015. So this is a graph for magnesium. Inadequate magnesium intake is widespread. The bars on this graph indicate the proportion of the population that has inadequate intake in various age groups. So what we see is that teenagers, young adults, adults in all ages and the over 70s. The red bars are female, the blue are blokes. So the majority of adults and young adults have inadequate magnesium intake. This is the same source of information for zinc. They're saying inadequate zinc intake is widespread too. So in all these healthy adults, widespread inadequate zinc intake. I'll come back to both zinc and magnesium because they're my personal favourite minerals, and I think most of us probably need to be supplementing them. This is another example. This is NHANES data. Now, it's very old data, 1996. Let me just explain what NHANES is. It's the big US dietary questionnaire that is conducted, I think, by the National Institutes of Health. Am I correct there? Yep. Done every 5 or 10 years. And this table was taken from an article by Lauren Cordain et al. 2005, The Origins and Evolution of the Western Diet. Yes, it's old data, but it won't have got any better in the last 24 years. And what this is saying is the majority of the US population are not meeting basic US recommended dietary allowances for things like zinc and magnesium. They're there at the bottom of that table, and zinc, their estimate is about 73% of the population are not meeting the basic allowance. Let me just say a word about RDAs, recommended dietary allowance. It's the estimated amount of a nutrient per day considered necessary for the maintenance of good health. And let me say the bar is not set high, and most of us are not making it over the bar. So zinc, what is zinc and what does it do? This is also from the National Institutes of Health. Zinc is needed by all rapidly producing cells, and rapidly reproducing cells include things like your hair, your skin and nails, the lining of your gut and immune cells. So zinc is needed for growth. It's needed to fight infection, and if anyone gets zinc off iHerb, you may have noticed it's quite hard to get zinc from iHerb at the moment because people in America have realised that zinc has got antiviral properties. It's also needed for sex hormones. Neurotransmitters, look up zinc and depression. And zinc is depleted by stress. It also helps with wound healing and is important for taste and smell. Bodies need zinc to grow and develop. Magnesium. What is magnesium and what does it do? Again, this is from the NIH fact sheet. Important for many processes in the body, and ones that are very relevant to us in the low carb community is that Magnesium is involved in, I think it's 5 of the 9 enzymes in the glycolysis pathway. So that's the pathway that breaks down glucose, the first step in that process of converting glucose into energy. 5 of those enzymes are magnesium dependent. They don't work well without magnesium. Magnesium is also depleted by stress, and in conditions of high blood glucose, your body loses magnesium. So there's actually a vicious cycle potentially happening here in people who've got glucose intolerance and hyperglycemia. If you've got high blood glucose, you will be losing magnesium. You lose magnesium, those enzymes that don't break, that break down glucose don't function properly, which means that the glucose is not being broken down. So your blood sugars go up. Do you see the vicious cycle happening there? Magnesium is also involved for many processes in the body, including regulation of muscle and nerve function, blood pressure, and making bone, for instance. So we tend to think of bone as being calcium. Well, actually, bone's a whole lot of other things as well as calcium, and magnesium is one of those things. I thought I'd have a little bit of a, just mention a couple of other nutrients. Vitamin D, I think perhaps it was Matt Ryan earlier mentioned vitamin D deficiency. It's estimated that about 1/3 of adults in Australia over the age of 25 are vitamin D deficient, and this particular paper concluded that strategies are needed at the population level to improve vitamin D status of Australians. What are the sources of vitamin D? Fat-soluble vitamins, fatty fish, fish liver oil, liver cheese, egg yolk, animal foods. And a quote from this article was, an animal's diet affects the amount of vitamin D in its tissues. And another thing that I found was that fortified foods provide most of the vitamin D in American diets. Like the health authorities are so concerned about vitamin D that they're fortifying foods. Iodine is another one of those things, another one of those nutrients which many of us don't get enough of. There was a lot of epidemiological data emerged about, I think, 15 or 20 years ago in Australia about iodine deficiency in the population, to the extent that in 2009, mandatory iodine fortification was implemented in Australia in 2009 through FSANZ. FSANZ is Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. And this required the replacement of non-iodized salt with iodized salt for making all bread. Mandatory iodine fortification of bread was intended to address the re-emergence of iodine deficiency in some areas of Australia and New Zealand. There's a whole story out there as to why this iodine deficiency developed, and it has to do with the use of the discontinuation of iodine as an antiseptic in dairy. So we weren't getting, Australian population was relying on getting iodine basically through contamination of milk and milk products through the disinfection process. When that disinfectant process was changed from iodine, suddenly the population became significantly iodine deficient. Why is this an issue, particularly in females of childbearing age and breastfeeding mothers? It's important to reduce iodine deficiency because that results in impaired neurological function in babies and young children. We also know that iodine is necessary for our thyroid. It's concentrated by the thyroid and made into thyroid hormone, but it's also concentrated in tear glands, salivary glands, the stomach, and also in gonads, ovaries, and prostate. And part of its function is as an antiseptic, a kind of natural part of our immune system. iodine is used by myeloperoxidase, which is an enzyme found in white blood cells that helps fight off infection. Sources of iodine include seafood, iodized table salt, and bread. The iodine content of plants and vegetables is dependent on the environment and soil in which they are grown. And again, Australia is one of those countries that has iodine depleted soil. So unless you've got a diet which is high in seafood or bread or salt, and most of us are not eating enough salt, as we've heard, and those of us in the low carb community are not eating bread. And are we eating enough seafood? Look, many of us may well be iodine deficient. So iodine is that important that it's included in pregnancy vitamins, and here's an example of a commercially available pregnancy supplement. But the rest of us who are not pregnant, are we getting enough iodine? So enough examples. The big question, should you take supplements? I want you to ask yourself, are you eating a nutrient-dense diet? Are you eating organic foods grown in mineral-rich soils? Do you have robust digestion? Are you well? Do you have a chronic disease? Are you taking medications, particularly antihypertensives or proton pump inhibitors? Are you stressed or depressed? Are you free from genetic polymorphisms? Does the nutrient density of your diet match your activity levels, your age, your sex, your reproductive needs? Are you drinking excess alcohol or using recreational drugs? Are you exposed to environmental toxins? Here's a hint. Everyone living in the modern world is exposed to environmental toxins, whether we like it or not. Is your body already depleted by years of exposures and deficits? Is there a viral pandemic sweeping the globe? So it's become commonplace to hear in the mainstream media that there's nothing that you can take that will boost your immune system, and all that stuff is hocus pocus. And here's a paper which says that administration of higher than recommended daily doses of nutrients such as vitamins D, C, E, zinc, omega-3 fatty acids may have beneficial effects, particularly on reducing the SARS-CoV-2 viral load. These nutrients are well known for their immunomodulatory effects. Deficiencies in these nutrients can result in immune dysfunction. Dietary insufficiency of vitamins and minerals has been observed in high-risk groups of COVID patients. And I promise that's probably the only mention of COVID that we're going to have for almost the entire weekend. I absolutely want to emphasise that I am a real food fanatic. People who know me will know that I hardly touch packaged processed food. I think real food is the basis of good health. However, I also think many people are probably nutrient depleted and will probably benefit from taking supplements, and not a scattergun approach, often a targeted approach. I also think that if a dietitian tells you that you can't get enough nutrition from a real food, low carb, grain-free diet, they are being hypocrites. And Dr. Georgia Eade points out that one of the big reasons why the dietary guidelines in the US and Australia recommend lots of grain products is that these products are fortified with synthetic vitamins and minerals that have been depleted due to processing, or that are missing because we're eating highly processed fake food grown in crap soils. So there's lots of reasons to consider supplements. If your diet is less than perfect, if your digestion could be better, if your health is poor, if you're obese and you're trying to lose weight so you're eating less, blah, 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 you tick some of those boxes that we've talked about, and if it helps you feel better. And at this point, I'm going to wrap it up.